Hello and welcome to the National Road Safety Partnership Program webinar, Coping as a Business and Supporting Mental Health During the Holiday Season. My name is Jerome Carslake. That's me if you haven't seen me before. And look, I'll chuck on the camera now as well and you'll see me pop up as well with our speaker. There we go. So joining me is Keith as well. Our webinar is going to go for around 60 minutes, plenty of time for questions throughout. It's going to be more of a conversational style as we move through it all. We're recording today's session and it will be shared on the NRSPP website afterwards, plus an email will be sent out with it as well. And there actually won't be a PDF from today's session. But as we move through it all, we would love your questions, chats, throw them in here and we can add them in there and take the questions as we move through it all. So we're very keen to make it as interactive as possible and when we move through it. So please take your time to add them in and we'll even stop trying to ask everyone to throw a few questions as we move along. So for us, we have Keith joining us today. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you very much.
Just a quick little bio on Keith, drawing on your LinkedIn profile. Keith really loves, he's worked for small to internationally scaled organisation, loves working on new challenges and environments where he can meet with and work collaboratively with many other people. So, which is why we're sitting here today. Keith's objectives are to always challenge and pursue opportunities for business process improvement and benefits both the overall safety of people and operations within his organisations. And I'd say to other organisations as well. Would that be fair?
Correct, yes.
Communication and interpersonal skills are Keith's core strengths, where he can leverage the most from his experience to bring value to his organisation. So is that a fair representation of who you are, Keith?
I would like to think so, Jerome, but if you speak to my wife, you'd probably get a very different perspective.
Well, let's jump on in. I'm really keen to get everyone sort of opening up and sharing how things are at the moment with you. So where do you think your advice and your wealth of knowledge sort of comes from?
I think for me, I've been really lucky that over the last 15 years, I've worked with mainly large retailers and food manufacturers in Australia. It's given me a whole host of appreciation for the type of risk that we have coming into a Christmas period, which is usually busy for those two industries. But in the last 2 or 3 years, I've been working for a company called Gallagher. We're a consultancy. So I'm lucky enough to be positioned with either small businesses, mum and dad organisations, tradies, all the way through to big ag, large farms and metalwork fabrication. So I've seen a lot of businesses the last couple of years, and I think that's probably helped me to form some opinions and hopefully to share them with you today.
Awesome. And do you think, like that's a massive diverse group, and obviously the NRSPP is centred around the vehicles of workplace. Do you see common threads and themes through all these sort of organisations?
Okay. I really do. I think that when we first started having a chat about what we would talk about today, what really struck me was every year, and especially in the concept of retail, every year you plan for this major scaled event. You plan for something that's going to be the most exciting thing in the world, and you put all your effort into it. You get through the other side, you have a collective breath of, oh my God, thank God I finished that. And very rarely do you take the time to stop and pause and reflect on what we do. What do we do well? What could we change to be better? And you launch yourself into the same type of event 12 months from now. So I think that what's common for all of the businesses and industries that I've seen is we've gone through 2 years of COVID. We've been in lockdown. We've been disrupted. I think businesses have been focused very early on at caring for their people, making sure they move technology onto cloud so they can still operate. This year has really been all about trying to pick up on lost time. We've worked at a frenetic pace. We have pushed our bodies, our people, our businesses beyond what many think is actually viable. And we're really tired. We're coming to the end of a very, very long year. And I think commonly for people, I've heard the term the great exhaustion. This year has been an exhausting year. And we're starting to see, I think, the impacts of that flowing through. We're hearing about it as the labour market is tightening. it's becoming really hard to find the right people. You are finding it hard to retain people because they're moving around a lot. And I think all of this is indicative of the types of pressures that we've had in the last couple of years playing out. And probably for us, Jerome, I would say that for any of the viewers that are on today, there's a real opportunity to pause on the other side of this Christmas break, reflect on what we've done really, really well, and think about engaging with our workers on what do we want to meaningfully change, and what do we want to design as good work in order to be really successful in 2023.
So how do we go about doing that? What I hear you saying there is the sort of three parts. There's the before, which we're sitting in right now, and there's always the rush to get things done. You're pushing hard, and sometimes people cut corners.
Yes.
And that may be at work, or it might also be at home to try and get everything done before the lead up to the holiday period. There's the holiday period where everyone's a sigh of relief, and then there's when everyone returns.
So I think it's probably important for me, any good manager has a whiteboard, a set of notes that are on their desktop somewhere.
I love a good whiteboard.
Correct. If you can keep a corner of your whiteboard set aside for the action items, and it becomes a really dynamic place where you pick up on some of these issues that come up and go, I actually need to remember that, and I need to go back and do something about it. It's change policy, it's react to planning, it's dealing with something that was an unknown beforehand, but now you're aware of it. As you say, in the moment, you just got to deal with it, make decisions to keep the business going. But if you've learned from it, and there's a quieter period in the next year where you can actually go back and reflect on what could we have done differently? Should we have asked our supplier when their cutoff dates were? Should we have reached out and planned for this particular type of eventuality? How does that play out? You can actually get a lot of value. So first thing is to keep a board, because in the now, the before, you're learning things. And it's how much you're going to forget if you don't jot it down somewhere. So you've got a little to-do list to come back to at some point in time. So that's my advice. I think for the short-term future, which is this Christmas holiday break, I think one thing that we really have to do is to start to acknowledge our people in the lead up to it before our people go, so they understand they can walk away feeling recognized for their work. But it's also important for us to note who is going away into a period that's also high risk, because there are going to be some people that don't actually have social connection outside of the workplace. And for those individuals, when they come into a period where it's about family, friends, social connection through the Christmas period, through the New Year period, it can actually be quite a lonely experience. These are the ones that sometimes need the orphan Christmas because they need to be part of something. But I also think that it's a chance sometimes for them to self-reflect and for thoughts to become a little bit darker. So any opportunity that you have to identify those individuals, make sure that they know that they have a connection that they're coming back to, positive community engagements. And if not, you try and set up some degree of function or messaging that goes through the Christmas period to remind your people that you care about them and you wish them for Christmas, you wish them for New Year, or just a general catch up. Those can be really powerful tools to give someone social connectedness. And in the mental health sphere that we're in now, we actually realize that that's a really powerful device and medium to giving people good mental health. Then I think in the longer term, this is when we come back. My suggestion, and I know it's easy from an ivory platform that you and I are sitting on, but within businesses, and I've been within businesses, the first 3 months of next year is going to be really crucial. Businesses and managers especially, and I count myself as one of these beforehand, managers that come back and you throw yourself into work, you throw yourself into trying to recover from last year, and you don't take time to self-reflect, I caution you now that you're setting yourself up for failure. The managers that are very successful are the ones that put time into their diary aside to reflect on what have I learned. It's the managers that navel gaze. They look at that to-do list that you started to fill out the year before, and they go, what will I materially do about this? So the most productive managers and strategic leaders are the ones that are able to take some time out for themselves to think creatively and critically, and to come up with solutions that will improve their business outcomes. So those are my
Words of wisdom.
Words of wisdom.
That's great. I'll just take it back a little bit as well, because you mentioned around some of those people, sort of going in the Christmas period and they may not have someone or pressures or more isolated as well. Just in the lead up to it as well, what's your thoughts about, like, how do we keep them engaged in the lead up to it? Because quite often, if you're driving for work-related purpose, you can be in the vehicle by yourself and you're in your own minds, and you can have the opportunity, unfortunately, to dwell on these sort of things as well. What is probably a good message for those sort of people and for the people that manage?
It's a tough one. I have to admit, John, that probably what becomes really important, and many of us, especially in the retail, transport, and logistics sector industry, but again, this is translatable, we really focus on what's important to us at the time. So we're always talking about operational KPIs. We're always talking about the components that are important because they're being measured in the executive dashboard somewhere. For these workers that are on the road, for the ones that are dwelling in their own minds or are competing, because there are more of us on the roads at the moment. In the lead up to Christmas, there are more people trying to do their shopping and to get all sorts of other things tied off before the end of the year. You're going to actually have significant risk exposure because you are conflicted, you're thinking about other things, you're distracted. I would say that if we can clarify our messaging in these last few weeks before Christmas to be about, how are you? I'm looking forward to seeing you later today. It'll be nice to see your smiling face. It'd be great to hear your stories. Having them reflect in a positive space, I think, is really important. The concept of the full year in getting people into a rhythm to operate from an operational perspective, to make sure they understand what your processes are and how you deliver on it. That's what the first 8, 9 months, 10 months of the year is about. This particular period, you should have a fine, well-honed team that are just reacting to normal business process. Now's your time to care for them in a psychologically safe way. So as a manager, looking at my people, I want to know more about my people. What are they going to be doing for the Christmas break? What are the other pressures that are going on in their world? So, for example, for some of us, we don't manage early break till just on Christmas Eve, but school finishes the week before. And quite often, sometimes we don't actually think about the impact on our workers, the distractions they have because they've got kids at home, or they're trying to find others to look after their kids. So if you start to engage with your workers and understand what this risk is, you can help them to plan for it. You can help them to own it and control it. The more they feel in control of it, the less distracted they are on the roads. You get a safer individual, all because you gave them the chance to have control. And the only way that you got to understand what their issue was and to talk to them about it was taking the time to actually listen to them.
So real checking.
Correct.
Actually listening and knowing just little things about them more than just you're here for a job, you're a number.
Correct. I think what we're really good at least what I found in my experience, is on a Monday morning, everyone checks in that your footy team lost or your footy team won, and there seems to be a natural conversation that starts with that. Through the course of the year, around Mother's Day and Father's Day, we talk about what did you get. But what we, I think, tend to fail on in a period of time where we're all collectively busy. And again, I really reflected it as a manager in this space myself, is you actually have to create the time and you have to be present. Because it's too easy to go, okay, I asked, are you okay? But before the person's actually responded, I run off in that direction.
Or you're thinking about the next topic
that's right.
Talk about.
Correct. But if you pause and give yourself the option to be there in that moment, it can be a really powerful message for the individual.
And we've got a great comment here. Thankfully, the organisation I work for recognises that the world carries on after the end of the year. Yes, it's great to get things done and completed prior to the end of the year, but there is always another day tomorrow. A lack of planning on someone else's behalf should not constitute an emergency on behalf of our people delivering the service. Sounds a bit idealistic, but good principles to follow where possible. I think I love that point. That's a great one when you sit there and you go, I'm big on planning, making sure everything's sort of done, lead up, and just trying to reduce the risk of everything being the last moment. Because it's not fair if you're sitting over a team and leaving everything to the last moment. And we'll talk about rowing earlier. So for those who know, I'm a passionate rower, and our lead up to a race, training 6 months, sometimes 6 times a week, remember I had a girlfriend at the time. She goes, and she watched one of our races. And she goes, "You trained all that for that 5 minutes?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's worth it." But it's all around preparation to succeed.
It is, but it's also, one of the largest causes for mental health issues for workers is this perception about job control in organizational justice. And I think for any worker, especially the ones that are on the road that are getting frustrated because I didn't get all the paperwork. I've driven out here, my load's been rejected, or others that are on the road trying to fight with schedules that are just unrealistic. If we don't spend the time talking to our people to learn about what worked well and allow them to participate openly in the conversation and show them that their feedback actually meant something, it was a change. The company learned from it, the company changed because of my feedback. That can be really empowering. So I think to the person who provided a comment, completely agree. But it's also about making sure that it's not just managers and middle managers that get that power. It flows all the way down.
I think we were talking about this earlier as well, to your point. If someone out on the road sees something like that, they have the ability to raise it up, and they know they're going to raise the question, it will be received in a positive way, and the organisation will act on it.
Correct. And I think probably more than anything else, we find in my consulting experience that a lack of true incident reporting doesn't allow you to look at predictive factors, doesn't allow you to intervene early. So the more that you can build a culture, and again, it's about nurturing that through the course of the year, the more you can build a culture where drivers feel like anything that they offer is being listened to, or the moment I come back to the shed and Jerome was actually there, he asked me what my experience was, but he was listening to me. He wanted genuinely to know what was happening because he wanted to take it away and look at his planning for next year. That makes me feel like I actually want to tell him honestly what's going on, and maybe even a little bit more about myself and the impact it has on me.
And I also think on that, when you do the check, it's back to the earlier points, if you're asking someone to share, it's following up on those things as well.
Correct.
Because someone shares something with you that may not seem it's really work related or something like that, but I think a lot of people forget that it's not often that people can compartmentalize something between habits at home flows into
what happens at work. Completely agree, Sean.
And I had an interview, a truck driver just on Monday. He goes, "I know I'm the outlier." As a manager, he goes, I've always been able to separate the two.
Yep.
He goes, "But I know that's my unique skill. So when the people I manage, I'm even more pointed on checking on them."
It's interesting. I went out to a firm recently, and part of my role was to go and interview stakeholders in different parts of the organisation. One of the drivers that I went to, I talked to him about, "Do you know that there are mental health supports in your business?" He goes, "Yeah, I do. I don't need it." So, okay, so what do you do? "Oh, that's what I've got the boat for. I just get away from everyone, don't talk to anyone. I get out on the boat during my Christmas break, and that's about me. I don't need to do it with anyone else. That's about me." But people actually having that sense of awareness about what is my de-stressing tool? What is the thing that is of value to me, so that I need to nurture that? I need to turn to that, or that's the self-care that I have to preserve and make time for. Not everyone knows that. So even if you're really clear about being selfish, it's about understanding that, knowing how that fits into you as a whole person. So again, I encourage managers, if you're thinking about learning about individuals, it's about learning what these hooks are that really excite people, incentivize them, because then you can have genuine conversations with them through the course of the year about the fish is good, or, I've just learned about a hotspot from another person I was talking to. Do you know about this? Yeah.
Yes, and I think it's those real sort of linkages. And just drawing back a little bit as well, I think you touched on, I guess, the COVID world. Now we're in this current world, and there's a bit of a hybrid sort of model going on as well. And then there's people trying to find out what is the new norm, what's the flexibility of this look like, and you're talking then around what's my relaxation. For me, when I drive, I like to not be on the phone. I like to listen to a podcast or music. That's sort of my time, and the car helps me de-stress. And I'm sort of swimming, doing things like that. So that's how I sort of bring myself down for active. But how do you think transferring into this new sort of world is putting pressure on reflecting on people driving for work, getting to work, moving around the place?
I think we find ourselves more and more challenged in this new world because of the concepts of flexibility. And if not for us and how we're dealing with it, some of our customers and clients may have changed in the way that they've worked as well. I think that ongoing pressure to manage work and life is playing itself out differently. I remember driving once or twice during COVID and feeling at peace with myself on the road because there was hardly any other cars around. It just felt like it was perfect. And then that was the end of that 1 week. Now we're back to normal. Don't let anyone else tell you differently. The roads are maniacal. People don't have patience. They're constantly cutting in and out. And it's this concept of, I need to be somewhere really fast. My task is important, it's urgent. I've got pressure. But and that concept of pressure and I need to do things quickly is usually what ends up resulting in injuries and incidents, regardless of whether you're on the road or in a factory or in an office environment. It's a very common thing. So I wonder, especially as we come into what is commonly described as the busiest time of the year, the time of the year that is most stressful as we lead into that Christmas period, everyone's rushing to tie things up and get things done. The core message from the business, especially to people on the road, needs to be, what is the pressure you're under? Let's have a good conversation around that. Let's actually see if there are things that are not valuable because we want you to get there in one piece. We want you to think about that.
So is it real or is it perceived?
And I think that is got to be the most honest question that any manager can have with their worker, because the amount of workers that take on a sense of implied ownership for the company's success, and they then have these perceptions about, I need to work harder, I need to work faster. We see it playing out in mental health decisions around manual handling. Should I ask for a 2-person lift? Do I need to go and bring that trolley or that mechanical aid to help me? No, I've got to do this fast. So I've got to just lift it. I've got to carry 2 more boxes rather than coming back and picking it up again. And those are the decisions that end up causing us hurt and harm. And when you think about it, in the lead up to a period of time where you want to enjoy your leisure, if you're carrying an injury with you during this period, it is the worst experience to not be able to participate fully. So to have that discussion and dialogue with your individuals and to remind them, you don't want them to work with a perception of pressure. You want them to safely finish and actually get to enjoy their Christmas break. It's a very important tone to bring into your workers. And again, it's about that personalization of why are you arriving at your decisions? Where are you getting that pressure from? It's not from me.
And there's 2 parts of this as well. I guess there would be the perceived perception of driving for work, the work-related environment, trying to get everything done, trying to clear the sheet so you can sit in and go away and leave peace of mind. Then there can also be, you've got to get the house, you've got to catch up, you've got to get everything ready for, if you're hosting Christmas or other sort of things, people coming in, have I got everything ready? Or if I'm going off overseas or going on holiday somewhere, I've got everything cleaned up so I can walk out the door. And look, I'll share on the latter one. I certainly am guilty of that one. I think I cut corners. I finished falling off a roof and shattering the lower back, and was the Grinch that stole Christmas for everyone. So I did that last, I had this obligation where I thought I had to get everything done. When in reality, didn't really have to do it, but then it impacts on everything and everyone.
When we think about the safety culture that we're trying to bring in, and a lot of businesses are really proud of the culture they instill in the workplace. I'm just going to draw people's attention to something. We talk about the mental health continuum being something where it's not all about work-related factors anymore. We have real blurring of issues that you take from the workplace into the home, or you bring from the home back into the workplace. For me, a really good safety culture is about the awareness that you give an individual, where they actually take and live that, whether they're at work or at home. So, I had someone talk to me about the fact that in an office setting, in order to change a light bulb, we'll have a safe operating procedure about the ladder that we're choosing. We'll have maybe one person holding the ladder. We'll go up and change the light bulb. But at home, you pull the dining chair across, you jump up, or if you're mowing the lawn, rather than putting on, and maybe this is not everyone, rather than putting on your hearing protection and your safety goggles and steel cap boots, and making sure you've got enclosed pants. You see people in shorts and thongs, and they have,
Off you go.
Yeah, because we just need to get it done. And so it's this perception about how much do I really care about my own health? And again, if I'm role modeling this for my family and I'm teaching my kids because they're observing me, what is the role model that I want to be? So if we think about it in the workplace and go, as a senior worker, as a manager, what is the type of behavior I want to role model so that the others around me know that safety is important? I don't walk past the plastic shrink wrap on the floor in the shed. I actually stop and pick it up because it's as important for people to see me doing it and for me to believe that that's important. I stopped an incident from occurring. That builds that culture. And then if you do that right, people become change agents. And it's not just your workplace, you're doing it in the community.
I was out at Alex Fraser, did some interviews out there just last week, and we were talking around how do you support a safety culture in an organisation. And for those who don't know, Alex Fraser, they move a lot of like substrates and materials and everything, and he just pointed to the stock that goes, you see it, you own it. And he goes, then he's recited the whole of it. He says, I walk along, there's some of this, I pick it up to that exact point. He goes, we all do that. But I'll remember next time I catch up, if I go out there, does that translate to home? That's a great one.
And you'd be surprised by the number of people that start to take home with them. You'd be surprised. There are people that talk about it, but then sometimes need to be reminded of it themselves. So for me, we're sharing Jerome. So for the audience at home, especially my wife's going to be watching, whenever I vacuum, which is quite frequently, I tend to be the one that has trailing cables left in, or if I'm going to go and empty the catcher, I might leave the vacuum where I have it, go and empty it, but then I'll hear a thud, a crash, and one of the kids or my wife would have gone and discovered where the vacuum was kept. So it is something we probably always need to be mindful of, is, are we applying that same standard? If we're proud of a standard of safety in one part of our lives, do we apply it elsewhere?
I think, a good family Christmas present for one of those robotic vacuums. Got a good question here from Manal. What are some tips to deal with bad mental health during a busy period? Any techniques?
That's a really, really good question, Manal. I think for me, definitely as a worker, as an individual, the concept of self-care is one that's really important. It's important to set aside time in your calendar, in your time frame, to do things that are good for your physical health as well as mental health. In particular, and I know that sleep is probably one that we tend to cut back on in the lead up to this particular period of time, but actually having good sleep hygiene is the term that I've learned recently. Same way that you brush your teeth, you look after yourself, you get into a pattern, so it's a hygienic pattern. Sleep and actually going to sleep at the same time and giving yourself a good quality and quantity of sleep on a regular basis is actually really good for your mental health, as is keeping up with general exercise. You don't have to necessarily go to the gym, but to try and find ways to include a little bit more exercise into your day, and probably better diet, especially as we lead up to a Christmas period where we know part of it is the ability to gorge, and I will be very guilty of that. You don't get a body like mine without putting in some effort at Christmas time. But it's about that behavior and knowing that when you are fatigued and you are on the road a lot, you're also taking some time aside to eat properly, because that can catch up with you. As a manager, good mental health at this probably at this moment in time more than anywhere else is about making sure that you practice the art of checking in and you practice the art of active listening with your workers, because I think that it is the quality of content that you get in those conversations that you will use now for this particular period of time. But then, Jerome, as you mentioned earlier on, it's about the really good managers that remember the one thing that I told them, and 3 months from now, they checked in. If I told them that I had a professional development course and I was fretting about making sure I passed it or balancing my workload, and we resolved a particular issue now, it's that same manager that comes back to me in 3 months' time and says, how did your course go? Have you succeeded? Are you proud of yourself? Those become really rewarding moments for the worker because my manager recognized it. And there's no value attached to it. You know, a lot of businesses put a lot of effort into, I need to have gift cards, I need to have prizes, I need to have a huge award ceremony. Research actually shows us that genuine recognition from the manager, whether it be written or verbal, is actually more powerful. quite often. So Manal, those are my suggestions for what they were.
That's really, I engaged with someone a while recently, and one of the key things they said is a key thing to understand your workers is actually doing it's the love language.
Yeah,
we've got to be a bit careful with this as well. We're very clear that and getting people to understand what does that actually look like. So to your point, if someone likes to be verbally acknowledged, that written or just taking those little gift or where that sits, touching, it's not cool. It's not really, but how does that sort of sit in getting us to actually understand each person? Everyone is different.
No, I completely agree. I've had people where you really want to recognize them, so you make a big song and dance about in front of the whole team, and they get really embarrassed. They don't like that attention focused on them. It actually builds up their anxiety. So I completely agree with you. Learning from your workers what works well for them, and being able to observe it over a period of time, and to help reassure them by using that form of connectedness is a really, really powerful tool. And I think that we don't, as managers, it's not a skill that you develop. Most managers get chosen to be a manager because they are usually operationally or technically very good at their role. But what we're describing is a people skill. It's a life skill. And if you learn it, then, maybe if you are on the cusp of teenage years, like I am with my daughter, we might be able to learn how to survive.
I think we might be talking a bit more often about that.
Yeah.
Just thinking about, because one of the things that I took out from my own experience going through COVID was in all of our virtual meetings. I think we brought it in, and just the start of whips or anything. It's just the honest check. How are you going?
Yep.
And trying to tie that into everyone when we catch up. And the other part was also being a little bit honest. Maybe I'm a little bit too honest sometimes. Because I remember I caught up with a colleague and we were in line. We were flying to Adelaide, coming just right from Adelaide. I looked at him, you look really exhausted. He went, "Oh, geez, thanks." I said, "No, just looking at you in the eyes and stuff." And that's really resonated when you spoke about the year of exhaustion. Then he went on and shared a whole lot about it to me. I mean, I shared my story as well, and I think we both helped each other through that. But I think that's sort of been one of my great learnings from COVID.
Yeah, look, I think probably what I took away, Jerome, in my experience with it was not only this concept of the great exhaustion, but the fact that you can have a duality of focus. So in the last year and a half, I spent a lot of time working with businesses, some in the logistics sector, some outside, but I think the learnings are transferable. A lot of time and attention was put into one part of the business. So in the case of logistics, to the on-road drivers, making sure that we had them working with COVID. We didn't want them to get knocked out, to knock out business operations. We had a number of businesses that actually forgot to check in with their admin teams because the admin teams were working away from home, or the admin teams now had flexible work arrangements. You didn't see them as often. And there was a question mark about, what are we doing to check in with these individuals? What are we doing with them to make sure that we're monitoring and managing that degree of risk? And I look at it, and your point to when you have these Zoom calls, it's actually asking that question and being honest about it. This is this reoccurring pattern and theme that we've talked about all the way through our conversation today. As a manager, it's actually having the courage to check in and to build a personal relationship with your workers, to be present during that period of time, and to actively listen so that you're hearing those little nuanced conversations about what is increasing pressure. Oh, my parents are sick. Oh, my children haven't been doing too well at school, and I'm really worried about how to support them. It's knowing that those are factors that are playing on people's minds and then display themselves as interpersonal conflicts, complaints from customers, or other issues that are now predictive. You can actually do something with that information. But quite often, too many businesses rely on performance management to try and filter that out. They haven't taken the time and opportunity to learn about the people in advance to use that information as lead indicators. It's only when you come to a point where you go, your performance is failing, we really have to either manage that, put you on an improvement plan, or talk about what you want to be here, that sometimes some of this comes out, or they end up losing people. So
if you're disconnected and they
that's
are paid.
right. Correct. A good value conversation to connect people and to make them feel like they are wanted. They're not a number. It's not something that it's about productivity. It's about me as an individual. can really help to build a relationship and a hook in to keep your employee with you. And in this day and age where we're looking at, in some cases, people changing jobs once every 12 to 18 months, it can be really powerful to be able to keep a person for longer. It can reduce those overhead costs of recruitment, training, and other retention factors.
And just running that now, because I guess some of these people, when they drive for work and they're going in and out, there's one of the things that happened during COVID is they found they got better quality sleep, had a better relationship with their family and their kids because they're at home more often. Now there's possibly creep that's been coming in through the year where you might be, okay, I want to come home now to help with this, I have commute. And so now I might be pushing more into my after hours as well. What's your thoughts around that?
Look, I think it's actually, we had one of the best opportunities that we have ever had to start a conversation about social change on what our perceptions of job design were. And I think probably one of my fears, I don't think it's prevalent to all businesses, but I think one of my greatest fears at the moment is we are creeping back into old habits. And it started out gradually at the beginning of the year. I think probably since June, July, it's been like a landslide because work, productivity, trying to actually find and slot in some time for a break, a holiday break, has been really difficult, not just for me, but for a number of people in different industries that I talk to. So again, I caution those that are managers that have responsibilities to plan and to talk to your workers about themselves. We need to have honest dialogue about what is good work and job design. And in actual fact, it's one of our legislative obligations. Our obligations are to consult and to communicate with our workers, but to also identify psychological hazards, and job control and design of work is actually a psychological risk factor. So the more that you actually start to have these conversations, if you ever end up with an inspector turning up on site and asking you, what do? You don't even need to talk to them, and you send them in to have a chat with your workers because you're living that. You're actually doing dynamic risk assessments every single day because you are having conversations with your workers about job control, organizational design, scheduling of work, and it's a two-way conversation. You start to tick these.
I remember one organisation I was talking to a while back was actually saying how they created a really strong culture, great near misreporting, all these sort of components. There's a young worker and he was driving out and he experienced a couple of micro sleeps about 9:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
He reported it, which is a great thing. So he put that up there. Then when the organisation dived in and actually said engagement conversation and began discussing it, 19-year-old, his breakfast every morning was Red Bull. And then they looked at the hours and they came with some around to understand processing. So what's happening is as the Red Bull wore off and he had no fuel in the tank, he was then going to fatigue, and this happened to be his turn to drive the vehicle. And so that's when fatigue. So that organisation engaged in the whole conversation with him and with all the young people. And said, well, this is the importance of having a proper quality breakfast instead of relying on an energy drink.
What surprises me is when we look at the availability of data in organizations, and again, I have to context this. Sometimes I see myself and I go, I'm not a data-driven person, but everyone that talks to me goes, you're evidence-based, Keith, you need data. One of the things I look at whenever I go into any organization, I'm looking at their incident history, is what are the age groups of people? What is the time of day something's happening? And is there a trend to correlate between those two? Because usually you end up with one or two patterns. If you can disrupt that, you can do a lot to positively reduce the number of incidents that you have. So I'm really pleased that they asked that conversation, because it doesn't just end up happening to one person. You can actually change the lives, the risk factors for so many others when you have a positive conversation.
And sometimes you don't know what you don't know, or you're assuming.
Correct.
Just changing gear a little bit now. We've spoken a lot about leading up to, and we'll touch on a bit the during. What about when after the holiday period, once everyone begins returning back to work? Because statistically, that's one in regards to crashes in the workplace, and NTI, the NTASI report makes it very, very clear that's one of the most high-risk periods when people get back on the road and they begin driving for work. and they just dive straight back in and back behind the wheel.
I make a suggestion for everyone. You know, we have some businesses that do this really well when contractors come onto site. I don't care if you've been here before, you need to be reinducted. We're going to have a conversation about the hazards are here because you haven't been here for a while. If you want to take it seriously, I would say that for anyone where you've fallen out of rhythm because you've been away for a period of time, it might be really great as a team to get reinducted into your work. Let's have a genuine talk about what the hazards are that are present in our work. Let's make sure that we've done, you know, in some cases, people do physical pre-start exercises. You do stretching programs for your body to warm your muscles up before you get into the day. I look at it and go, what if we had a mental stretching exercise? You use it and go, what if we actually use our reinduction to get ourselves to think about health and safety? What is a core message that we can use? And it may not have to be a full reinduction on day one, but let's pick a theme. Over the course of the first month, what are the most common injuries and hazards we experienced in 2022? Let's start to talk to our individuals about that. And over the course of every week, for 4 weeks, let's make sure that we have one core topic and we reinduct everyone, just have them focus on it. And then we're ready to hit the full year running.
I love that. That is such a simple idea, just saying so. And you can begin planning that now. Like you're saying, another thing is reflecting on putting that into your calendar as to how do I prepare for next year. And that's where, whilst everyone's focused on the here and now, that's a good way of prepping for next year to get the ball rolling.
Correct. And it means then that you actually start the year off with the tone and tenor that you want, rather than getting into it, getting caught up in everything that happens with us normally. And by the time you actually get to planning, it's already April, May, half the year's gone.
Time does fly.
It does.
And what about, how do you think, what's a great way to sort of build that sort of team culture, do you think, as well?
Look, I think that for myself, one of the things that I'm looking for more and more with businesses is a chance to find ways that we can actually get together. I realize now that with the way the world is, hybrid working has to be part of that model. So whether you bring people together and you have some degree of social connectedness through newsletters or having a barbecue day and getting people to try and come in physically, but if they can't, having something that connects them in. Bring your own lunch and you can join us and we'll still be together as a team or as a group. I do believe that is important. I think in the lead up to Christmas, our breakup events, the opportunity to end the year, to recognize the effort that we put into it, ending the year strong, and again, providing that social connectedness. We do appreciate what you've done. We want to look after yourselves because we want to see you next year. And we want to see you fighting fit because we need you next year to be even better than this year was. Those are all core and important messages to be passing on. But if we don't plan for it, we don't look at ways to make sure that all of our people feel that connection. Because if you think about it, long haul drivers may never get a chance to actually be part of a barbecue because they're on the road, or the time that they're in may not equate to when you've got your barbecue going. So, for example, do you cook some extra and make sure that it's sitting in there waiting for them? So they have a care package when they actually bring their vehicle in a little bit later in the afternoon. Do you make time to go, okay, we know that there's going to be a change of shift. So we're actually going to make sure that we're universally inclusive. It's remembering that within our own context of a business and organization, whilst you can have the messaging about a team, there might be pockets of people within your organization that don't feel connected because no one thought about my time. No one thought about whether I have to be the only person taking the calls so that everyone else can go and have a break. Do you actually plan for a rotation? So halfway through a barbecue, someone can provide that person relief. They can also join in. These are the small, little, nuanced changes in the way that we operate and the way that we plan for teams and actually provide meaning and give everyone a sense of belonging.
It's little things that matter.
Always, always.
That's fantastic. So, what are some of the psychological health risks as well that you're sort of seeing emerging Like I think there's news out that come out of New South Wales, other sort of areas are going to flow in possibly to other sort of states.
Yeah, so definitely in New South Wales, the ACT, we've already got regulations passed. In Queensland and Victoria, it's currently sitting in front of Parliament. I don't think it's going to be too long, especially in Vic, where we just had our election finalised. It seems to me as an observation that we've got a dual focus coming out of regulations in places like New South Wales and Queensland at the moment. It's really all about the identification of hazards, looking at 3 or 4 core areas, including plant machinery, job design, control, etc. With places like Victoria and the Australian Capital Territory, the focus, strange enough, has been far more, and even Western Australia to a certain extent, has been about interpersonal conflict, bullying and harassment, sexual harassment in the workplace. So these workplace behaviours and what is acceptable. So I think for any of the viewers that are online today, I encourage you to think about the duality of your obligations. One is truly about identifying hazards and working with them as process or environmental hazards and treating them as such. The second component, and again, this comes back to the culture that you want to bring in, is about what is acceptable. What is acceptable for us in terms of the way that we engage with each other in our workplace as a business. But then when we think about the growing understanding of occupational violence and aggression, and the conversation started maybe 10 years ago, primarily with healthcare and emergency services, but now we see it in retail. We see it in call centres. There are more and more businesses. I go to my Virgin counter, there's a sign there, we expect you to be respectful. It's that same messaging because as a community, something's happened to us. We're either becoming more aware of it or it's becoming more prevalent that we're getting aggressive behaviours that are being demonstrated. So the best way that we can protect our people is to talk to them about what is acceptable for our context. You are entitled to a respectful workplace, free from harassment. You are entitled to a workplace where people talk to you normally. They don't need to raise their voice. They don't need to call you names. And your workplace, if it's on the road, if it's in a different third-party location, it's still your workplace. You're still entitled to it. We want you to tell us when you feel that's being breached, because we need to investigate it, we need to understand, and we need to respond to it.
Actually, one of the key things we've been doing, as I mentioned earlier, a whole lot of heavy vehicle toolbox talks. One of the topics we talk about is aggression.
Yep.
It's fascinating. We've interviewed a large number of truck drivers. We actually asked them, what makes you aggressive on the road? And all these highly professional guys, time and time again, they say, actually, I don't really get aggressive on the road. I get frustrated. And they just went, because there's no point getting angry. And so all of them set their time, there's no point getting angry about it. And I've seen rage, and they see these sort of things happening, and they're just like,
you know what's surprising for me? When we think about the chain of responsibility legislation that's going, I think Jerome, quite rightly, there's been a large focus on employers and making sure that we get drivers that are trained, we get vehicles that are well maintained. Quite often when I'm watching the driver CCTV footage and looking at responsiveness of drivers, I actually have to commend them for their reactions. It's actually not them, it's the community at large. It's actually the driver in that small little vehicle that might even be a P-plater or might be an adult with 2 kids in the back of their car that's trying to cut in front of a truck or cut across 2 lanes to get to the exit, but they're the most important person in the world, and they don't realise you've got a B-double that doesn't have the same braking distance that's going to collect them. But we see these behaviours repeated again and again. And it's that anger, that frustration that we are displaying as a community, which is why I think what's really important, the point that I brought up earlier on, what behaviours do we have as a culture within our workplace? And are we being change agents in the community? Do we see that same degree of behaviour reflected when a person is outside of driving a truck for us? Are they driving the same way on the roads? Are we encouraging and teaching our children to drive in the same manner? We've got a real opportunity.
And I think this is a great one. Just moving the last little bit now. What's a good lead and lag indicator for mental health, do you think?
There are a number of different factors that are involved. I think that probably for me, for anyone that's looking at it and going, do we have position descriptions or job dictionaries, I'd be looking at how many of these have you actually reviewed. So a number of businesses went out and they bought task dictionaries and job dictionaries, or they've written their position descriptions, and the position descriptions predate COVID or may have been written back in the 1980s. And no one's ever gone back to look at whether the job has changed. Is this job still fair and reasonable? Do we have the right skill set, the right resources and capability embedded in our people? So I would say that a great KPI is to actually set yourself a target to review your position descriptions and your job dictionaries to make sure you're looking at the cognitive functions that are required in that role and that you've got a way and means of measuring it. Training. And this is not just that we do train people, but I look at it and go, how much training have we scheduled? This is to inform people about hazards, to actually address mental health risks. How much did we actually deliver on? Because you can have a number of businesses that go, we've got money set aside for training, but training sometimes is viewed as discretionary. And it is the item that is moved off when we get into peak periods because we don't have time for it. What we don't realize though is in those periods of time, if we don't prioritize it, it's even more important. And it's the message that our workers are getting. Oh, it wasn't important, so I don't need to go. They then start to look at that as their priority. And then they start to make decisions about what other training do I need to skip because it's not a priority to my business.
On the job description, that's a really interesting point. On that, how many organisations do you come across? So if you're driving for work and maybe you're driving 3 or 4 hours a day, every day, how many organisations do they include? We expect you to be a safe driver.
Hardly any. I think it's actually a really forgotten topic. And unless you have a chain of responsibility lens where people are looking at it, again, through this concept of heavy vehicles, it's not even talked about. So I would argue that there are a large number of businesses that have what we would call grey fleet risk, where it's a vehicle that might even be a personal vehicle that's driven for the purposes of work. You have maybe sales teams or area managers or people that are driving from site to site. But if they're spending time on the road, it's a mobile workplace. We need to identify that hazard. We need to think about journey plans. We need to think about fatigue in a serious manner. But because it's just a one-off trip, we don't ever talk about it. Because they were leaving and we thought it was reasonable, they left at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and drove till 8 o'clock at night, we don't think about the train that they're going through and the fact there might be kangaroos on the road or they're going into poorly lit areas of the environment. So I would say that, again, if you're looking at planning for next year and you've got your whiteboard up because Jerome has told you to get a whiteboard, put it down there, grey fleet risk management. For me, it's probably going to be one of the emerging risks for businesses to deal with. And my business specializes in insurance. And one of the messages that I take away from hearing some of the brokers talk is it's becoming a harder, tougher market, especially for motor vehicle risk. So as businesses, if we think about what we can control our risk if we can identify our hazards, if we can assess it, and we can manage it to our risk appetite as a business. But if you don't identify it, you don't know whether you're insured for it, you don't know whether you've got it controlled, you don't know whether you have a legislative compliance breach. So it's going to become really, really important for businesses to take it seriously. Mobile places of work.
We'd certainly welcome if anyone else has any questions or thoughts they would like to put out. We're all inclusive, very happy to answer them. Otherwise, I think even on that, when you begin moving into that and just thinking about that safe driving for work, a lot of people constantly, because as soon as someone goes outside the door, you mentioned around we have processes, procedures for changing light bulbs, for holding ladders when we were talking earlier. But quite often people go out the door, they're outside that line.
Correct. And it becomes even more so when you have them deployed in regional and remote areas. So I think for managers that don't ever see their workers, if you've got a team that are working for you interstate in a country area, but they have to travel for work, even then you forget about them. You don't see them leaving the office door, and it becomes an even more important task and reminder when you are checking with your workers to check in. How have they gone? What does the next week look like? How many hours are going to be spending on the road? And the ones that tell you, I'm moving house. Oh, and yeah, as soon as I finish moving house, I'm going to drive to that training session 2 hours across. That's where you can learn. You can learn how difficult it is. You can actually have discussions with them about what are they prioritizing. You can talk about maybe whether the work team would support them by moving the training session 1 day later to make it more accommodating. But these are conversations you don't get to have unless you actually engage.
And have a personal relationship with them.
Correct, correct. There has to be trust that the manager is asking me these things because they honestly care about me.
That's fantastic. So, Keith, it's been absolutely fantastic having a conversation with you today. Just in our last sort of few minutes, I'd just like to close out and just say, look, following on all the things we've touched on, we've moved around and a lot in our conversation now. What would be the sort of key message you'd like to leave or for the people listening today to take away?
I think it's a simple message that we do have the ability to foresee risks that could be present in our business. And we have the responsibility as managers, as employers, to learn from our past and our past mistakes. So for those of you that are heading into a period where it is about disconnecting with work, even if it's only for a couple of weeks, and being able to enjoy your family and personal time, make sure that you plan and prepare for review. Learn from 2022, learn from 2021, and speak to people about what they would actively want to see change in order to have a safer workplace. I think if we can spend that time in January coming back, reflecting and having really powerful conversations, we can have much safer workplaces through the course of next year.
And do you think there's a difference between people who work in an office and people who are out the road and a combination of the two, or is it all the same?
I actually think that it's all the same, Jerome. I think going back to my earlier point about the fact that a lot of businesses focus on making sure that our tool of trade vehicles, like our trucks and our cars, are appropriately sourced. They have the 5-star NCAP rating. They've got all the maintenance. They've got all the telematics. The drivers are aware of their hazards and risks. But then it's the rest of our people that are driving not in those vehicles, that are on the road as well, that are maybe contributing to some of the risks that we see for other drivers. I think it's about a whole of business culture. We do not have silos. We have people that drive for work. And every single person that drives is important for us. Any person that's on the road, if you're in an Uber for work, if you're in a taxi for work, we want you to feel safe. We want you to know that you are safe. So we are going to treat our workplace as something that is important to us, but we will also act in that same manner when we're out in the community. Because if we can change community beliefs, we will end up with the roads being a safer workplace generally.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think it's a great one to close that one. So thank you very much for your time today, Keith, for coming all the way in for a conversation. And thank you everyone who joined us today. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to you all. This will be our final one for the year, and we look forward to kicking off next year. And I think it's a great way to close out. So thank you all very much.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.